Julia had always been fascinated by sharks. Ever since she was a little girl, she had spent hours watching documentaries about these incredible creatures and reading books about their behavior and habitats. She had always been drawn to the ocean and the mysteries that lay beneath its surface. As she grew older, Julia's passion for sharks only grew stronger. She studied marine biology in college and spent every spare moment diving and exploring the world's oceans. Eventually, she decided to combine her love of sharks with her passion for filmmaking and set out to make a documentary about these misunderstood creatures. Julia spent months researching and preparing for the shoot. She read every book and article she could find about sharks, interviewed experts in the field, and planned out the shots she wanted to capture. She was determined to create a film that would not only educate people about these incredible creatures, but also dispel the myths and stereotypes that often surrounded them. It wasn't easy. Sharks were often portrayed as villains in popular culture, and many people were afraid of them. But Julia was determined to show the world a different side of these creatures, one that was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and deserving of our protection. Julia traveled to different parts of the world to film different species of sharks in their natural habitats. She went cage diving with great whites off the coast of South Africa and followed hammerheads through the crystal-clear waters of the Galapagos Islands. Her next plan was to swim with whale sharks in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. On the day of the shoot, Julia and her crew set out with a small boat equipped with all the necessary gear. They headed towards a known shark habitat, eager to begin filming. As they approached the area, Julia could feel her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. The crew quickly got to work, setting up cameras and preparing the bait to attract the sharks. Julia watched in awe as several of the creatures appeared, circling around the boat. She couldn't believe how beautiful they were, with their sleek bodies and piercing eyes. But then, in a split second, everything changed. One of the sharks suddenly lunged towards the boat, and Julia felt a sharp pain in her leg. She looked down to see the shark's teeth buried in her flesh and felt a surge of terror wash over her. She knew that this was the moment she had always feared, the moment when her love for sharks could cost her her life. The crew quickly sprang into action, pulling Julia back onto the boat and rushing her to shore. She was in excruciating pain, but she knew that her survival depended on staying calm and keeping her wits about her. After multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy, Julia eventually made a full recovery. During all this, she realized that she needed to tell a story that would resonate with viewers on an emotional level, and so she decided to include footage from her own attack. At first, Julia was hesitant to show the footage. She didn't want people to see her as a victim, or to focus solely on the sensational aspect of the attack. But she also knew that her experience could help to humanize sharks and to show people that these creatures are not mindless killing machines. With the help of her crew, Julia created a powerful sequence that showed the attack from her perspective. She talked about the fear and the pain that she had experienced, but she also talked about the awe and respect she had for the shark that had bitten her. She explained how the attack had given her a new appreciation of life and had made her even more determined to protect the natural world. When the documentary was released, it was an instant sensation. People were moved by Julia's story and the beauty and complexity of the footage. They were also challenged to think differently about sharks and to consider their role in the ocean ecosystem. The film went on to win numerous awards, and Julia became a leading voice in the movement to protect sharks. She continued to make documentaries and to use her platform to educate people about the incredible world that exists beneath the waves. And even though she had been attacked by a shark, she knew that she had never felt more alive or more connected to the natural world. Matthew and Gina's shared love for marine life started when they were kids exploring their hometown beaches. They spent hours wading in the waves, chasing after starfish, crabs, and dreaming of the underwater world. As they grew older, their passion for the ocean deepened and they turned their hobby into a profession. Together, they created a YouTube channel dedicated to wildlife documentaries, specializing in sharks. Their unique videos showcased the lives of these creatures and dispelled many of the myths and misconceptions that surrounded them. They braved dangerous waters and weather to capture stunning footage that left viewers spellbound. Behind the camera, Matthew and Gina were not only colleagues, but also lifelong best friends, with a deep respect for the ocean and its inhabitants. That's why when their YouTube channel hit 1 million subscribers, Matthew and Gina were over the moon. They had come a long way since starting their wildlife documentaries together and wanted to celebrate with their loyal viewers. To show their gratitude, they decided to let their followers choose the topic for their next documentary. They set up a poll and asked viewers to vote for the wildlife they wanted to see next. The poll results were in, and the winner was the bull sharks of the Zambezi River in Mozambique. The duo packed their bags and headed to Mozambique, where they met up with their local guide, who would take them to the best spots to film the bull sharks. They spent several days on the river, getting up early in the morning to catch the sharks feeding, and staying out late at night to capture their nocturnal habits. The 3 days of the shoot had been nothing short of amazing. Matthew and Gina had captured some incredible footage of the bull sharks in the Zambezi River, showcasing their strength, speed, and grace. But there was something that had been nagging at Matthew ever since they arrived. Despite bull sharks being known to be solitary hunters, many of the sharks they observed were hunting in groups, coordinating their attacks, and sharing their prey. This was an unusual phenomenon, and Matthew couldn't help but wonder why this was happening. As he pondered this mystery, Gina simply shrugged it off, saying that it was just a coincidence. But Matthew knew there was more to it than that. He could sense it in the way the sharks moved, the way they communicated with each other, and the way they worked together to take down their prey. On the 4th day of their expedition along the river, while Gina and Matthew were busy filming at the mouth of the river, Gina's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of a bull shark going about its hunting routine, unperturbed by their presence. Gina signaled Matthew to join her in getting a better shot of the magnificent creature, but he urged her to leave the shark alone and exit the water. Gina, entranced by the shark's sleek movements, ignored his warnings and persisted in tracking the predator, unaware of the lurking danger nearby. Only when it was too late did she realize she had become the target of another apex predator. Dread washed over Gina as she faced a colossal 13-foot bull shark with lifeless eyes, realizing she was the hunted, not the hunter. Time stood still as she grappled with shock, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to make sense of the situation. With lightning speed, the bull shark lunged at Gina, sinking its teeth into her neck. The sheer force of the attack was overwhelming, and Gina felt the crunch of bones as the shark's serrated teeth tore through her flesh. Blood gushed out of her carotid arteries, staining the once murky waters a horrifying shade of crimson red. Gina's body went into shock as she desperately tried to fend off the relentless predator, but her strength faded quickly. The pain in her grievous wound was unbearable, and the shark's thrashing only worsened the damage. Gina could feel her life draining away, her vision growing hazy as the world around her blurred into darkness. It was a harrowing and tragic end to what was supposed to be an ordinary day of filming. Matthew stood frozen in terror as he watched the horrific scene unfold before him. He couldn't move, couldn't bring himself to intervene as the bull shark continued to maul his best friend Gina to death. The sight was gut-wrenching, and Matthew felt a sense of helplessness wash over him. But the horror didn't end there. To Matthew's horror, he saw other bull sharks converging on the gruesome scene. They were drawn by the scent of blood in the water, and they were closing in fast. Matthew realized with a sinking feeling that Gina's brutal fate was not over yet. One particularly large bull shark, measured around 10 feet in length, charged towards Gina and bit her leg clean off her body. The shark swiftly grabbed its prize and disappeared into the depths of the water, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. The other bull sharks wasted no time in joining the feeding frenzy. They tore into Gina's lifeless, mangled body, ripping off her arms, legs, and head with vicious ferocity. The water turned a sickening shade of red as Gina's blood mixed with the surrounding currents. Matthew could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Within moments, nothing was left of Gina. Her body had been reduced to a gory mess, devoured by the hungry bull sharks. Once Matthew realized that his friend Gina was gone, he snapped out of his shock and realized that he needed to get out of the water before he became the next target. His body was filled with adrenaline and fear as he swam fast as he could, his arms and legs pumping furiously through the water. He had never swum so fast in his life. He pushed himself to the brink as he felt his muscles burning while swimming. Looking back, he saw a fin approaching, and he swam even faster, gritting his teeth to reach the shore. Collapsing onto the sand, he cried uncontrollably. This woman, his best friend, was ripped apart by a pack of bull sharks, and he couldn't do anything to save her. Matthew survived the ordeal, but the emotional and psychological trauma of that incident will stay with him for the rest of his life. As Clara and George slipped into their snorkeling gear, the turquoise waters of the Australian beach glistened invitingly beneath them. The coral reef, hidden beneath the surface, was a world of wonder, teeming with a colorful array of life that awaited their discovery. They were no strangers to this underwater world, having explored its depths many times before, but each time held the promise of something new and exciting. With a sense of anticipation, they descended into the water, their fins slicing through the gentle waves. As they drew closer to the reef, the suspenseful feeling grew. The coral formations towered above them, casting eerie shadows on the sand below. As they swam deeper into the reef, the shadows grew longer and the colors more vibrant. Schools of fish darted past them, their scales flashing in the sunlight, while crabs and lobsters scuttled along the ocean floor, hiding among the rocks. Despite their familiarity with these waters, the sense of anticipation remained strong within them. The reef was a world of mystery and magic, and they knew that with each new dive, there was always the possibility of discovering something they had never seen before. But then, without warning, Clara was wrenched from her reverie by a sudden excruciating pain in her leg. She gasped, struggling to keep her balance as she looked down, only to see the cold, dead eyes of a massive bull shark staring back at her. Its razor-sharp teeth sank deep into her flesh, tearing and ripping as it thrashed back and forth. The world around her seemed to blur as the pain coursed through her body. She could feel her heart racing as the blood gushed from her wounds, staining the water around her in a sickening cloud of red. The shark seemed relentless, its grip unyielding, as if determined to drag her down into the abyssal depths. Panic and terror threatened to overwhelm her, but Clara fought to stay conscious, knowing that her only chance of survival was to stay focused, to stay alive. She struggled against the powerful jaws of the beast, her body writhing and convulsing as she fought for every breath, every heartbeat. The world had turned into a nightmare, a surreal and terrifying landscape of pain and terror. As the seconds ticked by, Clara's strength began to fade, and she knew that she was fighting a losing battle. But still, she fought on, determined to survive, to live another day, no matter what the cost. A blood-curdling scream escaped Clara's lips as the jaws of the bull shark clamped down on her leg, its teeth sinking deeper into her flesh with every passing second. The pain was unbearable, a searing agony that consumed her entire being. She felt as though she was being torn apart, her body racked with spasms of pain. But even as the shark thrashed around, trying to drag her deeper into the water, Clara felt a strong hand grab her and pull her away. It was George, reacting with lightning speed, his muscles bulging with the effort of hauling her to safety. His grip was iron, his determination unshakable, as he battled against the brute force of the shark. The ocean was in turmoil as the predator and prey battled fiercely in a maelstrom of foam and bubbles. The deafening sound of waves crashing was overshadowed by the thrashing of the shark's tail as it relentlessly pursued Clara and George. Clara felt the rough, abrasive texture of the shark's skin scrape against her leg, sending shivers of terror down her spine. The jaws of the monstrous creature clamped down with a force that threatened to break her bones, as she felt the warmth of her own blood spilling into the water. As Clara's vision began to blur and her strength started to wane, she thought it was the end. But then, she felt George's grip tighten around her and his muscles tensed with a sudden burst of energy. He pulled her away from the jaws of death, and they hurtled towards the surface, as if escaping from the depths of hell itself. Gasping for air, Claire broke through the surface, her chest heaving as she gulped in a great lungful of salty air. She looked around frantically, expecting to see the shark's fin closing in on them at any moment. But to her relief, there was only the sun-drenched sky and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It was a narrow escape, but they had survived. And as they lay on the sand, exhausted and shaken, Clara knew that she owed her life to George's bravery and quick thinking. Clara and George had narrowly escaped with their lives, but the terror of the attack would haunt them forever. From that day on, they never went into the water without a healthy dose of caution, knowing that danger could be lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to strike. Australia has some of the most beautiful and diverse wildlife in the world. From the smallest critters that can kill you with a single touch, to massive beasts that dominate the ocean. Sharks are commonplace in Australia and notorious for being extremely aggressive when provoked, something that Felix Marsh would come to find out during a scuba dive west of Perth in 2010. Faulty instruction and poor judgment would change Felix's life forever as he came face to face with the power of a massive great white shark. Felix was a Perth resident and spent a great deal of his life in the water, surfing in his free time when not at his job as a construction worker. However, one day, one of his friends came to him with the proposition of taking a scuba diving class, where an instructor would show them the ropes, and they would be able to check out some of the coral life near the shoreline and see what sorts of fish roam around it. Felix was quick to accept the proposition, and they set up their dive to be in the following week. He managed to snag some free time from work, so everything was going according to plan. On the day of their scheduled dive, Felix and his friend Jan went to the beach before everyone else, and they were both comfortable with surfing on the surface of the water, but not so much being under it. There was no one at the meeting place for the dive, but people started eventually showing up, and they seemed just as nervous as Felix and Jan. They made their acquaintance, and they all remarked how they felt safer knowing that more people were supposed to join them on the dive. All in all, there were 5 of them there, waiting on the instructor. The instructor arrived eventually, but he was 20 minutes late. He blamed his tardiness on traffic and a hangover, which set the group on edge. However, he had a friendly outlook and seemed confident, so the group went along with it. They boarded a small boat stocked with the necessary gear for a scuba dive and went out a few hundred yards from the shore. This was a rookie dive, so the instructor only wanted to show them the basics and some of the underwater flora and fauna through a quick dive. After a rather tedious but detailed instruction on how the scuba gear is supposed to work and how they had to behave in the water, some basic communication signals, and more. Before long, the 6 of them took their positions on each side of the boat and flung themselves back into the water. Felix remembered that the initial shock of the cold water was disorienting at the start, but he was quick to get acclimated and was gliding through the water in no time. He was struck by the immediate beauty of the corals below them and the, at a glance, millions of fish swimming around them. At the instructor's command, they commenced the descent lower, so they could see the reef more clearly. Felix and Jan were entranced by the fish and the vivid beauty of the reef, but they couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. In truth, they were fine as the instructor had years of experience under his belt. The group continued descending until they were a few yards from the reef itself. The instructor told them that they were not to touch anything on the reef, as it was a single massive organism, and it mustn't be disturbed. The group was okay with that, so they circled the reef and took in the sights. After a few minutes, Felix felt a strong grip on his shoulder and turned to see Jan with a terrified expression on his face, pointing beyond the reef. The pair went to investigate, only to find that the reef was being stalked by a massive great white shark. Jan later reported that the beast must have been around 20 feet, which is the maximum length a great white can reach. They immediately backed up and went to tell the instructor, who pointed for them to surface. After they breached the surface, a few of the divers immediately panicked and started swimming towards the boat. But the instructor stopped them and said there was nothing to worry about. As long as they didn't disturb the shark, they were fine. Felix and Jan were calmed by this information, but the rest of the group did not feel comfortable remaining in the water, much less after the guide suggested that they swim to the shark to interact with it. Felix, Jan, and the instructor went for another dive while the rest of the group went to the boat, and with each passing second, the pair became more paranoid that the shark would attack them. But they figured that the experience would be worth the risk. As they approached the shark, Felix thought about how dead its black eyes looked, but they didn't seem threatening. They got close to it at the instructor's command and touched the shark, amazed at how rough the surface of its skin felt, even through the mesh of the wetsuit. It was covered in scars, most likely from previous battles for dominance with other sharks. The shark circled them a few times, and it seemed to be minding its own business. However, things changed when they noticed that it started getting uncomfortably close to Jan, which Felix signaled to the instructor, but he didn't respond. This irritated Felix, who quickly swam up to Jan and pulled him away. This caught the shark's attention. As though a switch flipped, the shark suddenly twisted in its trajectory and made a beeline toward Felix, sinking its teeth into his arm and flailing wildly, seemingly trying to rip it off. Felix's respirator immediately fell out of his mouth as he let out a scream that was muted by the water around him. The instructor and Jan immediately swam up to attempt to free Felix, but the shark was simply too strong. Before they knew it, the water was red with Felix's blood, and they could barely see anything. Jan, who was holding on to Felix, felt his friend float into his arms as the shark shot away from them with a trophy in its mouth. Felix was unconscious by this point and losing a tremendous amount of blood, so Jan immediately started swimming up, clutching his friend by his side, with the instructor following close. When they breached the surface, the rest of the group on the boat was waiting with bated breath, as they didn't know what else to do. But two of them rushed to pull Felix out of the water. They managed to get him on the deck of the ship, and one of the divers went to get some cloth from her bag to tie off Felix's mangled arm. It was completely torn off at the elbow, with visible bone and sinew sticking out. Jan later remarked that it was no wonder that he passed out from the pain, as the injury was so horrific. The instructor rushed to the wheel of the boat and sped them towards the shore, alerting the Coast Guard about the situation, so there was an ambulance ready for them when they arrived. Jan stayed with Felix the entire trip back, which took less than 10 minutes, as it was a rookie dive. When they arrived at the shore, an ambulance was waiting for them, along with a crowd of people curious about its purpose there. The paramedics ran to the boat and rushed Felix to the ambulance, which took him and Jan to the nearest hospital. Felix had lost a nearly fatal amount of blood, so his heart rate lowered, and they barely managed to keep him alive on the way to the ER. He was admitted and had to stay in the ICU for a prolonged period, while his blood levels stabilized and the doctors had a chance to treat his arm. It was a clean break at the elbow, but the skin around it was shredded by the shark's teeth, resulting in nerve damage and loss of function up to Felix's elbow. He did manage to make a full recovery, however, but the trauma of the incident left him with PTSD and a strong fear of the ocean, thalassophobia. He never went into the ocean again, and the only bright spot of the incident was that Felix and Jan's friendship only deepened. The reason the instructor did not act in time was that he was holding his eyes shut through a migraine brought about by his hangover. The diving company fired the instructor and offered compensation for Felix's treatment. Francis has seen it all. The stunning views of the San Francisco Bay Area, the captivating skyline of San Francisco, and the eerie sight of Alcatraz Island. looming in the middle of the water. He had been a boat operator for the Alcatraz Island tours for a decade now, and yet he never got tired of the sight of the bay and the island. The day had started like any other. Francis had picked up a group of tourists from San Francisco Bay and brought them to Alcatraz Island for the prison tour. After the tour was over, Francis was waiting for the tourists to return so he could take them back to the bay. But something caught his eye. The calm waters around the island seemed to call out to him, and without any particular reason, he decided to take the boat for a trip around the island. The situation turned dire when the vessel's engine suddenly faltered, refusing to restart. Left stranded in the frigid waters near the island, Francis attempted to call for assistance, but was informed that it could be a considerable amount of time before a tugboat would arrive to aid him. With no means of propulsion and an uncertain wait ahead, he found himself in a precarious predicament. As Francis sat there waiting for the tugboat to rescue him at his stranded vessel, he couldn't help but feel restless. Something was nagging at him, like a persistent itch that he couldn't scratch. Suddenly, he remembered the acrid scent of smoke that had filled his nostrils earlier, emanating from the engine room. His curiosity piqued, he made his way to the aft of the boat, gingerly leaning over the edge of the deck to peer into the mechanical abyss below. It was then in that vulnerable position that fate decided to strike its cruel hand. Before Francis could react, a monstrous figure emerged from the depths of the frigid waters surrounding the boat. It was a behemoth of the sea, a great white shark, with jaws wide open and rows of serrated teeth glistening in the sunlight. With ferocious speed, it lunged at Francis, sinking its teeth into his shoulder with a bone-crushing force. A blood-curdling scream escaped Francis's lips as searing pain shot through his body. He felt as if his flesh was being torn apart, the shark's teeth slicing through his skin like a hot knife through butter. Blood poured out from the wound, mingling with the salty waters of the San Francisco Bay, staining the once calm surface a deep crimson. Francis thrashed and writhed, desperately trying to free himself from the jaws of the predator. But the shark's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper into his shoulder with each thrash and pull. The excruciating pain was overwhelming, and Francis could feel his strength ebbing away, replaced by a numbing sensation as blood loss took its toll. As the water closed in around him, Francis realized he was in a fight for his life. He tried to fend off the shark with his free hand, desperately striking its sleek body, but it seemed impervious to his feeble attempts. The shark's thrashing movements only served to drag Francis further away from the safety of the boat, deeper into the icy waters of the bay. Francis felt a sense of hopelessness creeping over him. His body grew weak, and his vision blurred. He knew he was running out of time. But then, a surge of determination coursed through him, fueled by a primal instinct to survive. Summoning every ounce of strength he had, Francis reached out with his free hand and groped for the shark's eye. With a primal roar of pain and determination, Francis mustered every bit of strength he had to hold on to the shark's eye, feeling its squirming body thrash and writhe in agony beneath him. His grip was unrelenting, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of the predator's eye as he clung to life with every fiber of his being. The shark, shocked by the sudden attack, momentarily let go of Francis's shoulder, giving him the chance he needed to pull himself away from its razor-sharp teeth. Francis felt a searing pain rip through his flesh as he tore himself free, his shoulder and arm mangled beyond recognition. But he refused to give up even as the water around him turned crimson with his own blood. He knew that his only chance of survival was to fight back with everything he had. With a primal scream of defiance, Francis kicked the shark's nose with all his might, feeling the force of the impact reverberate through his entire body. The shark, stunned and in pain, swam away in a sudden burst of speed, disappearing into the murky depths. Francis was left floating in the water, bleeding and battered, but alive. He knew he couldn't make it back to the boat on his own, but he refused to give up. With a flicker of hope, he looked towards the horizon, desperately scanning for any signs of rescue. And then, like a beacon of hope, a tugboat appeared on the horizon, rushing towards him. It was the backup he had called for earlier. Francis felt a surge of relief and gratitude as he was pulled out of the water and onto the safety of the tugboat. He was whisked away to the hospital, where he received urgent medical attention for his severe injuries. Despite the devastating loss of his left shoulder, arm, and hand, Francis emerged from his encounter with a great white shark as a living testament to resilience and survival. His body bore the scars of the harrowing ordeal, a reminder of the ferocity of nature's predators. The beaches of South Carolina are a sight to behold. The crystal clear water sparkled under the bright sun, and the soft sand felt warm and inviting underfoot. The ocean breeze carried with it the scent of salt and sea, and the sound of crashing waves provided a soothing background melody. Amidst this idyllic setting, a group of college kids had descended upon the beach for spring break, eager to let loose and have some fun. Andy was one of them, a tall and lanky guy with a mischievous grin and a carefree spirit. He had convinced his friends to rent a small yacht for the day, promising them a day of adventure and excitement. As they sailed further away from the shore, the group cracked open beers and started to let loose. The sun was shining, the water was warm, and the day was theirs for the taking. They joked and laughed, enjoying each other's company and the freedom that came with being young and carefree. But as the alcohol flowed more freely, inhibitions were lowered, and the group's sense of judgment became clouded. Someone suggested they dive off the boat and swim around in the deep waters below, daring each other to see who could stay under the longest. Andy was hesitant at first, knowing that the deep waters were home to all kinds of creatures, some of them dangerous. But the peer pressure and the allure of adventure got the better of him. He took a deep breath and plunged into the cool water, the others following suit. For a few moments it was all laughter and splashing around, but then, out of nowhere, a dark shadow loomed beneath the surface. Andy barely had time to register what was happening before a massive creature revealed itself to Andy and all his friends. To their horror, they met the apex predator of the sea, the great white shark. As Andy struggled in the water, his body thrashing with fear, his eyes locked onto the great white shark's eyes. They were cold and black, filled with a primal hunger that chilled him to the bone. The shark's massive jaws opened wide, revealing row upon row of razor-sharp teeth, each one glinting in the sunlight. Andy's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to stay afloat, but the shark was relentless. Its powerful jaws clamped down on his leg, the teeth sinking deep into his flesh. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that shot through his entire body. The freezing ocean engulfed him, the salt water stinging his eyes and nostrils. He kicked and thrashed, desperate to reach the surface and escape the jaws of the great white. But the shark was relentless, circling him with the precision of a hunter, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Blood seeped into the water from the gash on Andy's leg, a result of the shark's initial assault. The metallic tang of blood filled the water, further inciting the shark's primal instincts. Andy's heart raced as he felt the beast's massive jaws clamp down on his leg, its serrated teeth tearing through flesh and bone like a hot knife through butter. He screamed, the pain unbearable, as the shark shook its massive head, trying to rip him apart. Andy's survival instincts kicked in, and he fought back with everything he had. He jabbed at the shark's eyes, desperately trying to pry open its monstrous jaws that were clamped around his leg. The water turned into a crimson hue as blood mixed with seawater, creating a macabre scene. His vision blurred, his strength waning. Andy knew he was in the fight for his life. He mustered every ounce of energy left in him and delivered a powerful punch to the shark's snout. The shark finally released him, its eyes rolling back in momentary shock, giving Andy the opportunity he needed. He propelled himself towards the surface, blood trailing behind him like a grotesque crimson ribbon. His friends on the boat were screaming his name, reaching out for him as he breached the surface, gasping for air. But the shark wasn't done yet. With a final burst of speed, the great white charged at Andy, its massive jaws gaping wide. Andy's friends watched in horror as the shark's teeth closed around him, tearing him apart in a gruesome spectacle. Blood sprayed into the air, painting the ocean in a deep shade of red as Andy's body disappeared beneath the surface, consumed by a ravenous predator. The sea calmed, the only evidence of the harrowing ordeal being the blood-stained water, a haunting reminder of the brutal power and unforgiving nature of the great white shark. The rest of the trip was a blur for the group. They made up stories about what had happened to Andy, telling anyone who asked that he had met a girl and decided to stay in South Carolina a while longer. But the guilt weighed heavily on them all, especially as the weeks turned into months, and there was still no sign of Andy's body. As the sun rose over the pristine waters of the Great Barrier Reef, Harvey woke up in his small cabin on board the dive boat. He was excited to begin another day of diving and exploring the wonders of the reef. After a quick breakfast, Harvey joined his fellow divers on the deck to gear up for the first dive. The crew helped him check their equipment, including the scuba tanks, weight belts, and wetsuits. Once everything was set, Harvey and the other divers donned their masks and fins and plunged into the crystal-clear water. As he descended, Harvey felt the cool water envelop him. He gazed around him, marveling at the colorful corals and the schools of tropical fish that darted past him. He spotted a giant manta ray gliding gracefully overhead, and he felt a rush of excitement and awe. For the next hour, Harvey and his dive buddies explored the reef, taking in the breathtaking beauty of this underwater paradise. They spotted a sea turtle lazily swimming by, and Harvey snapped some photos with his underwater camera. He also saw a small octopus hiding in a crevice and a bright orange starfish clinging to a rock. As they ascended back to the surface, Harvey felt a sense of exhilaration and joy. He couldn't wait for the next dive, which was scheduled for later that morning. After a brief break, Harvey and the others geared up again and headed back into the water. This time, they were on a mission to locate a sunken shipwreck that was rumored to be in the area. Using their compasses and underwater maps, they navigated through the reef until they reached the spot where the wreck was supposed to be. At first, they saw nothing but sand and coral, but suddenly, Harvey spotted a dark shape looming in the distance. As they got closer, they realized it was indeed a shipwreck covered in barnacles and surrounded by schools of fish. They swam around the wreck, exploring its nooks and crannies and taking more photos. Harvey was thrilled to have discovered such an amazing sight, and he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. After the second dive, Harvey and the others returned to the dive boat, tired but happy. They chatted about their experiences and shared their photos, swapping stories and tips. Harvey couldn't believe how lucky he was to have such an incredible job, exploring one of the most beautiful places on Earth. As the sun set over the reef, Harvey settled into his cabin, ready for a good night's sleep. He knew that tomorrow would bring more adventures and more discoveries, and he couldn't wait to see what the reef had in store for him next. Harvey had always been fascinated by shipwrecks, and after yesterday's dive where they discovered one in the Great Barrier Reef, he knew he had to return for a closer look. He planned his dive carefully, ensuring he had all the necessary gear, and set out early in the morning together with his fellow divers. As they approached the shipwreck, he noticed something moving in the distance. At first, he assumed it was just a school of fish, but as he got closer, he realized it was something much bigger. A great white shark. Harvey's heart began to race with excitement and apprehension. He had never encountered great white sharks up close before, and he knew that one wrong move could mean disaster. As Harvey entered the water, he was immediately struck by the sheer size and power of the great white sharks. They glided through the water with an effortless grace, their razor-sharp teeth gleaming in the sunlight. Despite their fearsome reputation, Harvey felt a deep respect and awe for these magnificent creatures. He moved slowly and deliberately, keeping a safe distance while carefully tagging each one with a small device. As the day wore on, Harvey's initial apprehension began to give way to a sense of wonder and exhilaration. He was witnessing one of nature's most incredible spectacles, and he knew that he was privileged to be a part of it. Harvey watched the massive shark circling around the shipwreck. He knew that great whites were common in the area, but he had never encountered one up close before. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if they should abandon the dive, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he convinced the others to press on. They approached the wreck slowly and carefully, keeping a close eye on the shark. As they got closer, Harvey realized that the wreck was home to a whole ecosystem of marine life. Schools of fish swam in and out of the nooks and crannies, and he saw lobsters and crabs scurrying along the ocean floor. He also noticed that the great white shark seemed to be hunting around the wreck, using it as a source of food. Harvey watched in amazement as the shark darted in and out of the shadows, searching for prey. For a few minutes, Harvey forgot his fear and was completely absorbed in the underwater world around him. He was so engrossed in his observations when he felt something shift in his backpack. He tried to adjust it, but in doing so, he accidentally kicked a small rock that had been resting on the ocean floor. The sound of the rock hitting the shipwreck echoed through the water, and suddenly, Harvey heard a loud thrashing sound. He looked around and saw a massive shark heading straight for him. Harvey knew that he had made a mistake. He had accidentally disturbed the shark's peaceful existence and now put himself in grave danger. He tried to swim away as fast as he could, but the shark was too fast. It closed in on him, and Harvey could see its sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. The group was horrified as they watched the shark relentlessly attack Harvey, its jaws clamped tightly around his shoulder. Without wasting a second, the group of divers sprang into action. They formed a human chain, trying to distract the shark and draw its attention away from Harvey. Some of them even swam towards the shark and tried to hit it with their diving gear. Another diver signaled for the group to surface and call for help, hoping that a nearby boat or rescue team could come to their aid. However, the shark was too strong and too determined to let go of its prey. It thrashed around violently, causing chaos in the water. The shark was relentless, and it took all of the divers' courage and strength to keep it at bay. They were finally able to pry Harvey free from the shark's jaws, but unfortunately, it was too late. The force of the shark's bite had already decapitated Harvey. Despite the divers' valiant efforts, they were unable to save Harvey from the shark's jaws. As the reality of the situation set in, the divers were left feeling helpless and devastated. They had lost a member of their group, a friend, and a fellow adventurer. They felt a deep sense of grief and sorrow. They knew that the memory of that terrifying encounter with the shark would stay with them forever. They were shocked by the suddenness and violence of the attack, as well as by the realization of how short life was. The sight of their friend being attacked by the shark was something that would haunt them for a long time to come. In the aftermath of the attack, the group was left with a renewed respect for the power and unpredictability of nature, as well as a greater appreciation for the fragility of life. They knew that they had been lucky to escape with their lives, and that they would need to be even more careful and vigilant in the future. Mason stood on the deck of the fishing vessel, gazing out at the endless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The water stretched out before him, an endless churning mass of blue and green. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Mason loved this time of day. It was when the ocean came alive. He turned to his crew, a group of hardened men with salt-encrusted skin and rough, calloused hands. They were all busy preparing for another night of fishing. The nets were being cleaned and mended, the hooks baited and sorted, and the engines checked for any signs of trouble. Mason was just about to start cleaning the deck when suddenly he felt a massive wave hit the ship. He was thrown off balance, stumbling backwards and tumbling over the railing. He hit the water with a splash, the shock of the cold water taking his breath away. The crew sprang into action, shouting out commands and frantically grabbing ropes and rescue equipment. They had to act quickly to save Mason from the angry ocean, but they soon realized that there was a bigger danger lurking beneath the waves. The crew was frantically preparing to rescue Mason when they saw a large, ominous shape cutting through the water towards him. For a moment, they thought it was a friendly marine animal like a dolphin or whale, but their relief turned into sheer terror when they realized that it was an oceanic white-tipped shark, a predator renowned for its aggression and fearlessness. This was not just any shark, but a killing machine that could detect blood from miles away and could swim at incredible speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. Its sharp serrated teeth were designed to rip flesh and crush bones with ease, and its dark, lifeless eyes conveyed a cold, unfeeling hunger for flesh. As the shark closed in on Mason, its movements became more erratic and frenzied, and its large, muscular body seemed to dwarf the helpless fisherman. The water around it churned and frothed with an unsettling energy as the shark prepared to attack. The crew members felt a wave of panic wash over them as they realized that they were facing off against one of the most dangerous predators in the ocean. Mason fought to stay above the water, his muscles burning from the effort as he kicked and thrashed to keep the shark at bay. The oceanic white-tip circled him, its dark, lifeless eyes fixed on his prey with a chilling intensity. Its sleek body moved with sinuous grace, closing in on Mason with each pass, its sharp teeth glinting in the sunlight. Desperate to save their comrade, the crew sprang into action, tossing out a rope and buoy for Mason to grab onto. But as he reached for it, the shark's aggression intensified. With lightning speed, the predator lunged at Mason, its jaws gaping wide, rows of teeth gleaming with a primal hunger. Mason's heart pounded in his chest as he grasped the rope, feeling the rough fibers bite into his hands. But before he could pull himself to safety, the shark struck. Its razor-sharp teeth sank into Mason's leg, tearing through flesh and bone with brutal force. A searing pain shot through him, and he cried out in agony as blood clouded the water around him. The crew shouted in horror, trying to haul Mason aboard as the shark refused to let go. The beast thrashed and shook its massive head, determined to drag Mason under the water. The fisherman's grip on the rope faltered, but he clung on with all his strength, fueled by sheer willpower and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. In a heart-stopping moment, the shark ripped Mason's leg clean off, leaving a gruesome trail of blood in its wake. Mason screamed in agony, a primal scream that brought shivers down the spine of all his crewmates, trying desperately to pull him out of the water. The scene was brutal. The mixture of flesh and blood swirling like a vortex on the churning water left by the shark that plummeted under the water, taking with it a piece of Mason's mangled limbs. The crew was frantically pulling on the rope, trying to save him from the jaws of the vicious predator, but the shark was relentless. From under the water, the shark emerged like a torpedo, and it attacked once more, this time latching onto his remaining leg. Mason screamed in agony as the shark ripped his leg off. He could feel his flesh ripping apart as his other leg was devoured by the frenzied creature, warm blood flowing out of his body, mixing with the salt water around him. The crew was finally able to pull him out of the water, but the damage was already done. Mason was barely conscious, his body in shock from the traumatic experience. The crew tried their best to stop the bleeding from both his mangled legs. The trail of blood from his legs painted the sides of the ship, a grim reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the waves. Mason was airlifted to a hospital in Portugal, where he underwent multiple surgeries. But despite the best efforts of the doctors, he lost both legs. He was left to cope with the physical and emotional scars of the attack, haunted by the memory of the shark that had changed his life forever. Ayumi stood in awe at the edge of the colossal aquarium, her eyes fixated on the crystal-clear waters that housed the awe-inspiring great white shark she had been observing for more than a year. The shark research facility in Japan was a marvel of modern science, a cutting-edge facility built to study and unravel the mysteries of these formidable apex predators. Ayumi herself was a respected figure in the world of shark research, known far and wide for her unwavering dedication and unparalleled passion in studying these enigmatic creatures. Her heart swelled with excitement as she prepared to embark on yet another day of unraveling the secrets of the deep, eager to immerse herself in the world of the great white shark once again. The facility was buzzing with activity as Ayumi prepared her daily observation session. She put on her diving gear, adjusted her goggles, and took a deep breath. The water was chilly as she descended into the aquarium, surrounded by the tranquil beauty of the underwater world. The great white shark, named Kuro, gracefully glided through the water, its sleek body a picture of power and grace. Ayumi had developed a special bond with Kuro during her time at the research facility. She had spent countless hours observing and documenting Kuro's behavior and had grown to respect and admire the creature's beauty and strength. But today, something was off. Kuro was behaving unusually, swimming faster than usual and bumping into walls of the aquarium with force. Ayumi furrowed her brow in concern as she observed Kuro's erratic behavior. She had never seen Kuro act like this before, and it sent a shiver down her spine. She decided to wrap up her observation and started making her way towards the surface. But before she could reach the top, Kuro suddenly changed direction and started circling her, its large black eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Ayumi's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the danger she was in. She tried to swim away from Kuro, but the shark was relentless in its pursuit. It circled closer and closer, its powerful body cutting through the water with alarming speed. Ayumi's mind raced as she desperately tried to come up with a plan to escape the shark's deadly jaws. Before Ayumi could react, it happened. In a heart-stopping moment, Kuro charged at her with astonishing speed, a blur of sleek muscle and razor-sharp teeth. Ayumi was caught off guard, unable to evade the massive predator in time. With a bone-crushing impact, Kuro slammed into her, pinning her against the unforgiving glass wall of the aquarium. Ayumi's head struck the glass, a sickening thud echoing through the air, and warm blood oozed down her face, mixing with the salt water. The metallic scent of blood seemed to trigger a primal instinct in Kuro, as the once graceful shark now transformed into a frenzied beast. Thrashing violently in the water, jaws snapping dangerously close, Kuro's eyes were filled with a predatory's madness as Ayumi found herself trapped and at the mercy of a creature she had spent her life studying. Desperation surged through Ayumi as she realized the gravity of her situation. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, she kicked and thrashed, desperately trying to free herself from Kuro's jaws. But the shark's immense power was overwhelming. She felt the sharp pain of teeth sinking into her flesh, tearing her limbs apart one by one. Blood clouded the water around her, staining it a murky red as Kuro tore into her with savage ferocity. Ayumi's screams were muffled by the water, her frantic movements fueled by sheer survival instinct. She fought with every ounce of strength she had left, her body writhing in agony as she refused to succumb to the relentless assault of the creature she had once studied, determined to cling to life until her very last breath. Amidst the chaos, one of the researchers caught wind of the commotion and immediately alerted the rest of the team. A rescue crew scrambled to the scene, but what they encountered left them paralyzed with shock. A ghastly scene before them was one of sheer horror. Ayumi's lifeless body bobbing in the water, her eyes frozen in a look of terror. Kuro was still in a frenzy, thrashing wildly and ripping chunks of flesh from Ayumi's body with a ferocity that defied belief. With a burst of speed, the shark launched itself out of the water, and in one fluid motion, devoured Ayumi's mangled remains in a gruesome display of savagery. The crew watched in disbelief and horror as the water swirled in a vortex of water, flesh, and blood. And just like that, Kuro disappeared into the depths, dragging Ayumi's tattered corpse behind it. After the initial shock of the attack, the rescue crew managed to gather themselves and quickly drain the aquarium water, revealing the grisly aftermath of Kuro's frenzy. Ayumi's once vibrant body had been brutally torn apart by the shark, and only her head remained, lifeless and rolling at the bottom of the tank. The scene was a gruesome sight to behold, one that left an indelible mark on the minds of all who witnessed it. The once bustling Shark Research Center now stood silent and empty, a solemn monument to the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Even Kuro, the culprit behind the attack, met a tragic end, his life cut short by the consequences of his deadly actions. Euthanized as a result of the attack, Kuro's fate was a stark reminder of the high stakes and risk involved in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. The loss of Ayumi, a dedicated and passionate shark researcher, left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of those who knew her. Her colleagues were haunted by the gruesome image of her body being torn apart by the very creature she had devoted her life to studying. A reminder of the savage nature of these apex predators. It was a bright and sunny day at the Surf Beach in California, a popular destination for locals and tourists alike. It was a long stretch of golden sand, dotted with brightly colored umbrellas and beach chairs. The water was a vibrant turquoise blue, and the waves were gentle and inviting. There were several volleyball nets set up on the beach, and people could be seen playing games and lounging in the sun. Music played from portable speakers, adding to the festive atmosphere. The beach was flanked by tall cliffs on either side, creating a natural amphitheater that amplified the sounds of the waves and the laughter of the people on the beach. The cliffs were covered in lush green foliage, providing a striking contrast to the golden sand and blue water. At one end of the beach, there was a small harbor where boats could be rented for fishing or sightseeing. At the other end, there was a rocky outcropping that jutted out into the water, providing a popular spot for cliff jumping. There were several amenities on the beach, including restrooms, showers, and a snack bar. Lifeguards were on duty throughout the day, keeping watch over the water and ensuring the safety of the swimmers. A group of teenagers had decided to go for a swim in the ocean because it was a hot summer day and they wanted to cool off in the water. They had spent the morning playing beach volleyball and lounging in the sun, and as the day wore on, the heat became almost unbearable. Among them was 17-year-old Alex, who had always loved the water and was an excellent swimmer. The water looked inviting, and they could see other people swimming and splashing around, so they decided to join in on the fun. They had heard rumors that there were sometimes sharks in the area, but they didn't think much of it. After all, they had been swimming in the ocean before and had never encountered any dangerous predators. As they waded into the water, the teenagers felt the coolness of the ocean wash over them. They laughed and joked, splashing each other and enjoying the freedom of being in the water. They swam out further and further, enjoying the waves and the sun on their skin. They didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and the water seemed calm and peaceful. Then suddenly, Alex felt a sharp pain in his leg. He looked down to see a massive great white shark, its razor-sharp teeth sinking deep into his flesh. The force of the attack knocked him off his feet, and he struggled to stay afloat as the shark dragged him underwater. The group of teenagers witnessed a horrifying and violent attack as the shark's teeth sank deep into Alex's flesh, causing him to cry out in pain. The other teenagers screamed and tried to swim away, but the shark was too fast. As the shark circled back around for a second attack, its jaws gaped wide open as it prepared to strike again. This time, it bit down hard on Alex's torso, severing his body in two. The teenagers saw the full extent of the damage it had caused as their friend's lifeless body floated to the surface, torn apart and mangled beyond recognition. They watched in horror as the shark continued to thrash around, hungry for more. The other teenagers in the group realized they were in danger and quickly began to swim away as fast as they could. The water around them was turned up, making it difficult to see where the shark was, but they knew they had to get as far away as possible. As they swam, the teenagers could hear the shark's powerful thrashing in the water behind them, which only spurred them to swim faster. They knew they couldn't outrun the shark, but they hoped to create enough distance between themselves and the shark to give them a chance to reach the shore. Despite the terror and panic they felt, the teenagers remained focused on swimming and tried not to let their fear get the best of them. They swam in a zigzag pattern, hoping to make it harder for the shark to follow them. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the group reached the shore. They staggered out of the water, panting and trembling with fear, but relieved to have escaped with their lives. They looked out at the water, watching as the shark continued to thrash around, its massive body visible in the churning waves. The attack of the great white shark sent shock waves through the beach, and people quickly realized that they were in danger. As the other teenagers in the water tried to swim away, people on the shore began to scream and shout, urging them to come back to the beach. The beach quickly became a scene of chaos as people scrambled to get out of the water and call for help. As news of the attack spread, more and more people on the beach began to panic. Parents gathered their children and ran for safety, while others called for help and tried to get as far away from the water as possible. Emergency services arrived on the scene quickly, including ambulances, police, and rescue teams. They quickly assessed the situation and began to take action to control the situation and help the victims. Lifeguards were the first to respond, jumping into the water to try to reach Alex and the other teenagers who had been swimming with him. They could see the water turning red with blood, and they knew they were dealing with a serious situation. Paramedics and ambulance crews arrived next, and they immediately began to tend to Alex. Despite their best efforts, however, they could not save him, as he had been bitten in half by the shark. The police arrived on the scene soon after, and they began to cordon off the area, preventing people from getting too close to the water. They also searched the surrounding area for any signs of the great white shark, hoping to capture or kill it before it could attack anyone else. Meanwhile, rescue helicopters circled overhead, searching the water for any signs of the shark. They used thermal imaging cameras to try to detect the shark's body heat, but they were unable to locate it. As news of the attack spread, more and more emergency services arrived on the scene, including Marine Patrol units and Coast Guard vessels. They scoured the water for any signs of the shark. The beach became crowded with onlookers, and many people were outraged that such a dangerous predator could be lurking so close to shore, and called for increased measures to control shark populations. For the family and friends of Alex, there was no comfort to be found in the aftermath of the attack. They were left to grieve the loss of a young life cut tragically short, and to wonder how something so horrific could happen to someone so innocent. The memory of that day would haunt them forever, a reminder of the brutal and unpredictable nature of the world we live in.